Hi and welcome to challenge number 1. Hit that subscribe button and let's get started. Here we are with our very first challenge. Before jumping in and solving this challenge, I need to give you a little bit of information on how I'm going to organize these challenges. So these challenges are going to be in one directory in batches of 10. So we're going to have the first challenge up to the 10th challenge in one directory, and we're going to basically go forward like that because there are going to be like tens or maybe like a couple hundred challenges as we are moving forward with this series. And for every subdirectory within that categorization of 10 challenges, you're going to see that we have all 5 languages. We're going to start with JavaScript the way I did with data types, and then we're going to move to basically TypeScript, Python, Go, and Rust. For every challenges directory, you're going to have one MD file. The aim of the MD file is to give you the starting point for the challenge. There is going to be a challenge title right here, challenge description, what you need to do, and then you will be given some sort of an input and you are asked to basically come up with that output based on each language's requirements and standards and best practices and conventions. So it's going to be different depending on the language, but the input has to produce that output. That's the main part. That's the only part that the languages are going to have in common. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with solving the challenge. And just one last thing that I need to mention, I am going to try to give you a mental model of how any of these challenges is going to be solved depending on a specific language. But you need to keep in mind that you might come up with a different way. There is always going to be more than one way of solving these challenges, and no one of 2 solutions is going to be incorrect. So as long as you get the input and you are able to produce the output, your solution is correct. It could be that one solution is slower than the other. That's not the point. The point of this tutorial series is just to have the input and produce the output. That's it. So if you solve this and your solution is different than mine, no worries. As long as you produce the output, you're good to go. All right, let's jump into this challenge. So what is the challenge? The challenge name is trim whitespace. So you have a string like hello world, and you are supposed to trim the white space from the start and the end of it. So you get an output like this. There is no space at the start and at the end. Let's jump and let's talk about JavaScript. The way that we are going to go with this when it comes to JavaScript is JavaScript actually gives us a method on strings. That method is called trim. The trim method is going to trim the starting spaces and the ending spaces, and then we can basically log it to the console. All right, so first off, I need to create some sort of a variable to hold my input. All right, so what is the input? Let's just, let's just copy it from here. This is my input. Now, if I want to do something with this, I need to store it somewhere. So I could say stir, whatever. The name could be whatever you want. So that's my input. Now, the output, I could say stir, or this could be the input, let me capitalize the S. This could be the input stir. Now the output is going to be, we get the input stir and we implement on it the trim method. And then we show it in the console using the console log method. Here is the output stir. Now, if you take a look at my directory, current directory in the terminal, it's that big folder, that 001-010. I need to first navigate to the first challenge. So I'm going to say 001, and then I'm going to hit tab. It's going to auto-complete it for me. And now I am going to say node a trim whitespace.js. And as soon as I run that, you can see we got the hello world. There is no white space at the start of it, and there is no white space at the end of it. So that's how we solve this in JavaScript. Now, when it comes to TypeScript, technically any valid JavaScript code is also TypeScript. So technically I could just copy that, come into TypeScript and put it right there. And this is going to work perfectly fine. Now, for the simpler challenges like this one, you might wonder what's the point of actually even having TypeScript if both are the same. But as we move forward, as the challenges are going to get more and more complicated, we're going to rely more and more on utility types and type annotations that TypeScript give us. But for now, I'm just going to leave it that here, and I'm going to type annotate this as a string, which is not really necessary because this is something that TypeScript can do on its own. But I am going to do this anyway because I want to make sure that these two codes are a little bit different. Now, this is our TypeScript. For TypeScript to work, first we need to compile this. And once we compile that, then we can run it. So I'm going to say tsc. Let's grab our file. That's the B file. Okay, so now we got a JavaScript version of that, and we are going to run that. So I'm going to say B, and there we go. We got our hello world, and there is no space at the start of it. So now that these two languages are done, let's jump into Python and let's talk about how Python is going to solve this. Now, in JavaScript, what we saw was we had a specific method. Keep in mind, it doesn't really matter what the name of that method is. You need to know that. It doesn't matter what the name is when you're talking about comparison between 5 languages. What you need to take away from this challenge is, does any of these languages have some sort of a method that is going to help us to achieve our output? If yes, then use that. If no, then you need to come up with some way to basically compensate for the lack of that method. All right, so that's what you need to take away from this challenge. Let's get our input string. The input string is hello world. So this is Python code right here. We don't need to have that variable declaration keyword. And then I'm going to have my trimmed string, and pay attention to the snake case of Python. So Python does have a method that is called strip, which is going to basically strip the string from white spaces from the start and the end. But in here, I need to pass in my input string, and using the dot notation, we're going to get that. And the way we can print something in Python is just use the print method. And in here, I'm going to say print trimmed string. Save everything, come right here. You could either say Py or Python, and it should work. So I'm going to say Python C, and as soon as I run it, we got our hello world. And you can see there is no space in front of it. So that's the Python version of the solution. Let's jump into talking about the Go version. For the Go, because any Go file has to have some sort of valid Go code, by default, if there is nothing, you're going to see this error. Now, when it comes to Go, we need to have the entry point for our application. That's going to be the main package. You need to have that. You can't work without that. And the execution context is going to come from our main function. We have already talked about these when we talked about the data types in Go. That's why I taught that. I actually covered that. So in here, we just focus on how we want to implement this. So when it comes to Go, Go actually has some sort of a method that is going to trim white space from the start and the end of a specific string. And that method is called trim space. I'm going to come to that. For now, let's just get our input string. I'm going to use our short variable declaration. And in here, I'm going to say hello world. So this is our string, input string, and I'm going to create something called trimmed string or output string. Doesn't really matter what the name is as long as we get the output. In here, we need to insert the strings package. On the strings package, we have a method that is called trim space. And the trim space is basically going to allow us to trim the spaces from the starting and the ending. Let's pass in our input, and to be able to show something to the console, we need to have our format library or format package. Let's from the format, we have a function that is, or a method that is called print line. This is going to print our trimmed string. So far, the way that we have implemented these is almost the same. We create a variable, we put our input string, we create a variable, we put our output string in, and then we basically print out the output or the trimmed. In here, I'm going to say go run, and then the name of the file. Let's hit enter. The first time it's going to take a few seconds. There we go. We got our hello world right there. So this is how we are going to go about this with Go. And finally, when it comes to Rust, we need to talk about Rust. Rust is going to be similar to Go when it comes to the actual existence of the execution context and where it should start. It should start from a function that is called main. So in here, we do have a method that is going to trim the white space from the starting and the ending of a specific string. First off, let's create a string. Now, we have already talked about Rust that when you create a string in Rust, there are two types. You have string slice, you have onStrings. We are going to go with onStrings. So I'm going to say input string. So with the onStrings, you know the S has to be capital, and on there you have an association that is called from. And in from, we're going to pass in our input string. This is going to be hello world. Let's terminate that. Now we're going to have our output. I'm just changing the names of these variables because you should know that it doesn't really matter as long as it makes sense, because we are here to get our output. So the output string is going to be our input string. Then the method is going to be something familiar. It's trim method. And after that, we are going to say print line. And keep in mind, this is a macro. So you need to pass in that exclamation mark. So you need to have some sort of a placeholder where you want to print your output, and then you need to target that output as well. When it comes to Rust, we need to first convert this into an executable. So let's first do that. There we go. We got our executable, and after we get our executable, we just run that. And there we go. We got the hello world. Now that all 5 languages have actually tackled this solution, I want to just take a moment and talk about how each language actually tackled that. So let's do this. There we go. So the first one that we actually talked about was JavaScript. It gave us a method that was trim. So whenever you want to trim the white space from the start and the end of any specific string, you're going to get the trim method. We had the same thing in TypeScript. We had the same method in Python, but only the name was different. But keep in mind, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, the implementation is the same. You put your string into a variable, your input string, and then you store the output as well, and you trim the output. We did the same thing in Go as well, but just the name of the method was different, and it was located in a different place. And finally, we did almost the same thing in Rust. So when it comes to trimming white space from a specific string, all of these 5 languages implement that in almost the same way. That is it for your first challenge. See you in the next one. And please don't forget to hit that subscribe button.